Good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are. This is JD here with the Omnia Performance Podcast, and I'm joined today by my fellow head coach, Kieran Richardson. How are you, mate?
Yeah, all good, thanks. All good. It's a lovely rainy day here in London, so there we are.
Beautiful. It's thrown me into some sort of discombobulation. It's 9:20 in the morning. I'm like, good afternoon, everyone. So I don't know where that came from. Yeah, very strange, very strange.
Used
Hopefully
to
you're
be,
doing better than me this morning.
yeah, you clearly used to be still being in a different time zone.
Exactly. Are you finding your feet again back in UK time?
All back to normal now. So it took about a week for sleep to go back, and there we are. Can't complain.
Nice, man. That's cool. And how are you finding training at the moment as well? Because like for the listeners, you're just embarking on some new training, aren't you? And how's that all going?
Yeah, it's so good to be back in routine. Had a number of injuries I was struggling with at the back end of last year, and just being so busy, and then about 8 weeks out of routine between home at Wales, then New Zealand, then Singapore. So a lot of travelling, which I obviously can't complain about, but definitely impacted training. So it's so nice now to be back pushing, particularly cycling really hard. So 2 free strength sessions a week, 5 cycles, 2 runs. So very cycling biased at the moment, and hopefully set me up for a good race season.
Nice. How are you finding? I know obviously you haven't been back long, but how do you anticipate finding doing many outdoor rides? Obviously with the rain and hopefully it's not too icy, but do you expect to still get out on the road a few times a week or?
I normally do, particularly with easy rides where I don't have to worry about the structure. I'm quite lucky where I am in London. I've got Regent's Park, which is basically like for any Londoners who cycle, you'll know it's basically the unofficial velodrome of London. So very sort of safe roads for cycling, and as long as you've got good kit, it's honestly not too bad. The only time I desperately or have to go on the turbo is if it's really structured or if it just doesn't feel safe. But outside of that, I like to do as much cycling as I can outside. Just a lot more fun.
Nice. Like, for sure, I can imagine just staring at a screen on Zwift or whatever, or
Yeah,
training peaks virtual. Sorry, I should say.
of course.
Of course, exactly. And somewhat on topic today. Today we're going to be talking about the 5 pillars of ultramarathon readiness. We have got a pseudo ultramarathon, if you like, haven't we, coming up next weekend, 31st of January, depending on when everyone's listening to this podcast. It's coming up soon. How are you finding the injuries, obviously, relating to that? I know you and I perhaps aren't going to go for the full 50k, but yeah, how are you finding the running side of things at the moment?
So I guess I'm going to call it a maturity PB, in that I'm actually not for once going to get peer pressured into doing something really stupid. I haven't been doing the kind of running volume that we're going to talk about in this podcast for ultra readiness. So it would be pretty silly of me to go out there and attempt a 50k. I know that from my own experience, when I've done a number of ultras now, I personally need a reasonable amount of volume to feel ready for these things. So 2 runs a week, funnily enough, probably isn't going to cut it for 50k. Certainly, well, not for most people, and certainly not for me. So I'm going to be sensible for once, and I'm probably only going to run about 20k, which for me is a safe spot. I can roll out of bed and run 20k, and I'll be fine. But pushing more than that will be asking for another year of injuries and overuse. So I'm going to be sensible.
Fair. See, I've had an absolute fumble, and I've invited my other half along who insists she's going to do 50k. So now I can't not do 50k, can I?
It's just the rules.
Pride's at stake. Yeah, exactly. No, terrible. So you were saying about your own ultramarathon experience. So obviously, I'd imagine there's a lot of what would be the best way to put it? Kind of like cross reference between doing that and also your military background, like a lot of like marching over long distances, over I'm assuming sometimes like even multiple days. Tell us all a little bit about your experience.
Yeah, so the vast majority of my ultra experience has actually been through the military. So we have a race which is really popular in the unit I was in called the Lanyard Trophy. And it's as the crow flies, it's a 40-mile loaded march. So carrying sort of fighting load, about 40 pounds when you add in food and water, over undulating terrain. Is always somewhere mountainous. They change the area it takes place in every year. And it's a really, really hard day out, and the winning teams will always run the vast majority of it. It's essentially a weighted ultramarathon for the top teams, and I trained for that 4 years and won it once a couple of years back. So huge amount of experience on the military side, and then a couple of years back was also did an entire training block for a 100k run, which unfortunately didn't happen because the team just couldn't make it. It was a team event. Unfortunately, I was the only one that was free. But yeah, I've personally done a number of those, the military side of it. Trained a lot of people for those same races and multi-day marches and things like that. And then we've, as you're also in the same boat, we've got a number of athletes going for ultras at the moment. So very exciting time, both personally for us and all of our athletes.
Yeah, for sure, man. I mean, yeah, this weekend, notably, we've got a couple of guys doing the Arc of Attrition.
Yeah.
So shout out to Richard and Donny. So Donny's doing the 50 miler and Richard's doing the 100 miler. Should be awesome. So for the uninitiated, Arc of Attrition is it's part of the UTMB series, isn't it? So it's basically this ultramarathon that goes across some very rugged terrain across the coast of Cornwall. It's gnarly. Yeah, the guys have had superb preps for it. Yeah, I expect them to have a blast doing it. Maybe not at the time, but upon reflection, they'll have had a great experience. So yeah, it should all be good. So we're going to talk today about these 5 pillars of ultramarathon readiness and perhaps how we can draw some practical examples of what these guys have been doing in their own training and yeah, kind of make it as interesting and as accessible to you guys as we can. So Kieran, do you want to kick us off with the first pillar?
Absolutely. So the first, and hopefully this should come as no surprise, particularly if you listen to other episodes, the first sort of area is the aerobic base, and there really is no way of getting around this. When we're talking about such long duration events, that aerobic base needs to be very broad, i.e. you need to have established a really high amount of high quality aerobic work, and you need to have been doing it for a long time, and that's the crucial thing here. You can get a lot fitter in terms of how your heart and your lungs and your muscles adapt in a short period of time. But when it comes to all of the other structures that are so important, your tendons, the bones of your feet and your shins, if you haven't been doing all of this kind of work for a long time, it's simply not going to happen on race day. And it's going to look very different depending on the distance. There's a number of different ways that we can skin this, but realistically, you need to have spent a very significant amount of time in zones 1 to 2, because at this kind of distance, you are going to spend a lot of time walking. There's no way around that, particularly uphill. So the vast majority of your training needs to be focused on that long duration. How can I accumulate as much volume as safely as possible? And for most people, that's going to involve a huge amount of very easy work with only a small amount of higher intensity work. And when I'm working with my athletes, depending on whether it's either a road or a backyard ultra or a trail ultramarathon, that high intensity work, usually we try to make it as specific as we can. So whether that's getting out on the train, getting up and down the hills, using the elevation to spike your heart rate rather than speed, that's often most relevant. If I've got sort of London dwelling athletes going for trail marathons and things like that, then we can use things like the treadmill intervals, using incline. There's a whole number of ways that we can attack this, but the long and short of it is that these are entirely aerobic events performed almost entirely in zones 1 to 2, potentially spiking out on the elevation, and the training needs to reflect that. So when we're looking at our training week, we basically need to think, how can I achieve the highest possible volume for me and my life as safely as possible without compromising the other elements of my training? And if we can do that on the aerobic side, then we're going to be in a pretty good place. And
then with respect to that pillar, so if we say this is like aerobic capacity is pillar number 1, what would you say is relating to this pillar? What would be a common mistake that people would make who are perhaps preparing for an ultramarathon and maybe neglecting this side of it? Where's a common kind of pitfall?
I honestly think, and this is underrated, and anyone who's done a number of ultras will tell you, the sheer time on feet is hard to prepare for from running alone. So things like a high step count and extending your runs through walking, they're all really valuable strategies, particularly if and this is really applicable to the trail side. So one of the things that I have my athletes do, and this is very applicable to military athletes as well, going for certain courses, we'll have them go out to, sort of relevant ground, get up in the hills, perhaps go out to a country park, whatever it is they've got near them, and just alternate run walking, walk all the inclines, run all the flats, be on your feet for 3-4 hours, for example. And that accumulates far, far more time on feet than you could say if I gave somebody a 4-hour run on flat ground, that will batter them. That is so hard to recover from. It's right at the top end of what most people could recover from, and quite frankly, that's an event in itself. Whereas a big day in the hills, alternating between running and walking, is about as specific prep as you can possibly get. So I think most people really, really underestimate the value of just a high step count and being prepared for a long day on your feet.
No, makes sense, man. Cool. Perfect. Right. Ready for number 2?
Yeah, let's do it.
So number 2 is being durable. So durability kind of ties into your point, Kieran. So spending a lot of time out on the feet, not only is it building up your aerobic capacity, but it's also building your durability. So it's getting you accustomed to spending that really long amount of time on your feet. So for guys at the weekend, they could be spending up to circa 24 hours out on the feet. It's a bloody long time, and you've got to be adapted to it. So it's not just being fit enough for it in terms of a cardiovascular perspective. It's also making sure your feet, your tendons, your ligaments, and all your other associated joints can handle it. And not only are you building up this durability from the sheer volume of training that you're doing specific to ultra, but it's also, doing your strength training as well. I think it's it's perhaps more of an observation rather than like a cause and an effect. But quite often when you see really good ultra runners, they're often a little bit more solid than very good road runners, I would say. Would you agree with that observation?
Definitely. It's such an important element, isn't it? And we always talk about this. You can't be consistent if you're injured, and it really is as simple as that. We all know consistency is the most important element of this. And what's the easiest way to become inconsistent very quickly? Well, it's to get hurt, and to anything we can do to avoid that is going to be super powerful. So yeah, we certainly see it, don't we? People who have a bit more strength behind them, perhaps a little more cushion, and it really, really does make a difference.
For sure. I think even to kind of some of the more finer points, thinking about how you can use strength training to perhaps increase your tolerance to downhill running. So making sure you're eccentrically strong, even some sort of training to perhaps prevent cramp resistance. So for me personally, I do often struggle with calf and groin cramping at longer distances. So having some heavy eccentric training to try and desensitize the tendons a little bit could be potentially quite helpful. But then I guess if we're going to look at a common mistake that people would make in this area, I think it's just ultra training often takes a lot of time, right? You said yourself, get out for 3-4 hours in the hills, out on your feet. It's a bloody long time. It's then therefore very, very tempting to say right, all I'm going to do is run or walk or hike or whatever. And that comes at the cost of your strength training. So the biggest mistake I think people would make in this area is not respecting strength training, not getting it in. So try and look at it as we often say on this podcast and in our material that we put out, focus on the minimum effective dose. So what's the least amount of training that you can get away with to get what you want out of it, but not spend a ton of time doing it? So just enough to move the needle, start there, and then you can make an assessment from there. Cool. Right. Ready for number 3, mate?
Yeah, let's do it. And this is one we see all the time, and it's only going to come up in the later stages of your races, and that's pacing discipline. And I suppose probably the most important thing to remember here is that what you do at the start of your race is going to have a magnified impact towards the end. And it's very, very easy to do, particularly in longer races where you feel fine to start with, particularly if there's a flat start or perhaps the first climb of the day if you're out on a trail. And it's so easy to feel like you're going to push faster than you had planned, or to get caught up in everybody else starting fast, because people always do. Where we always joke about it at the races I've done, in that everybody just sprints off for position in what is essentially a 50-mile race, and it absolutely knackers people in the first sort of section of the race, and if you're not careful, if you're not disciplined, it's going to really, really impact things. So do not be afraid to walk hills, particularly early on. It's one of those things that most people who are attempting trail ultras are probably in a position to run a lot of the more gentle hills because they've been training for a long time, and at this point they're probably pretty strong runners. It's very tempting to run these hills knowing that you can. However, often it's a very good strategy to walk them, to conserve yourself for later on, particularly if you perhaps have to make up time, or just heading off all of those issues that come up later. So fairly simple point. We don't need to labour this one too much. Just be disciplined, have a plan, stick to it, know the course. So, do either recce's on the area, have a look at the elevation profile on Strava, know, okay, I've got a massive hill at halfway. I need to hit that hill strong, so I need my first half to be slower than my second. I need to be disciplined. Whatever the case is, just know what you're going into, know where to push, and then stick to that plan. Don't get tempted to push harder just because you feel good, because there's a very good chance that you'll pay that price later on.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, don't get too excited at the start. Keep it in check, right? And I think obviously there are exceptions to this, but I think a lot of people who we work with, as far as ultras are concerned, they're going more for completion rather than for to achieve a certain time, which I think is fair to say for most people. So I guess have that in the back of your mind and treat your race strategy indeed with that in mind. And you're not trying to achieve a certain pace. You're trying to get through it. When it comes to ultra running, a lot of problems arise which are going to affect your pacing. So keep yourself in check, go steady. Remember that what you do now is going to impact what you're going to do later. Cool. I think we covered that one nicely. So the next one is massive. So it's fueling and specifically making sure that you're training your guts. So this is absolutely not something that you want to wing. You should have been practicing your fueling and your race day nutrition in at least most of your longer training runs, if not all of your other training runs as well. So even if it's only an hour to an hour and a half run, still fueling quite aggressively, I think is good practice, because it's all just getting your gut to adapt to a higher intake of carbohydrate. And when you're doing these races over an extended period of time, you are going to have carbohydrate availability becoming a limiting factor. And Kieran, in your experiences doing some of these ones in the military, I'm guessing you'd have seen a pretty broad spectrum of people perhaps failing with their fueling versus succeeding. What kind of pitfalls have you noticed? And even in your own athletes who you've trained since being in the military, what kind of mistakes have you seen in that regard?
Honestly, it's one of the biggest aspects, particularly in the military races, because there's the old school attitude of just crack on. All you need is a flapjack and a pack of cigarettes and crack on, you'll be fine. It's what more do you need, right? And it's really, really pervasive, and people are very hesitant to push fueling as hard as they need. And the year that we won it, I actually sat the team down, and we had the sort of my right hand man was a cyclist, so really understood fueling as well. So both of us were pushing fueling really hard on the team, and it was a night and day difference. None of the team were bonking. We were strong right until the end. It was a really hard course, and our winning time was something like 13 and a half hours, which was pretty slow for a winning time. It was a really, really hard day out, and we all stayed strong right up until the end because we pushed fueling so hard, and we knew our numbers, so we were aiming for absolute minimum of 60 grams of carbs an hour, more if we could tolerate it, and we stuck religiously to that, and it made such a difference. And compared to years where that hadn't been the case, you see people bonking left and right. You see it all the time, even on shorter races or shorter events. The main thing that I see with the fueling side as well is that it's not just the game day. Fueling well allows you to take on a higher volume of training in general, and lets you be more prepared, stops you being as depleted from the training that you do, helps you recover better. So I see it all the time. My athletes who are better with their fueling, 9 times out of 10 they can handle more volume anyway, and I certainly feel this myself. In the past, whenever I look at periods where perhaps I haven't handled volume as well as I could have done, or perhaps I've got hurt, often it's because I've got lazy with not just my daily intake, but where that intake is coming from around my training. Often it's because, well, maybe I'm hitting my daily calories, but I'm not having as many carbs as I need around my training window. So I've seen a huge impact there from really, really paying attention to fueling, not just on the day, but as you said, all throughout training. It makes such a difference, really does.
Love. For sure. And that's the thing, it genuinely does make a massive difference, doesn't it? I mean, it's really easy to be quite flippant about it and be like, well, as long as I just get the work done, it'll be fine. Like you said, your example of the guys who you've interacted with in the military, just be like, oh, yeah, just have a flapjack and just get on with it. It's a very suboptimal approach, and one that unless you're very lucky, probably will bite you in the backside. And I think in terms of like other mistakes, there's loads in this area, isn't there? I think one other one that I see is perhaps the longer the race, unless you're very, very, very confident in your ability to keep on eating the same thing and know you're going to tolerate it, is to have some sort of variance in between your fuel across the period of time. So flavour fatigue and taste fatigue is a real big thing. So I've had it before where the first ultra I did, I relied on those like little banana saurine bars. And after like 4 hours of just those and the occasional gel, you just couldn't think of anything worse. But you know that unless you keep getting it in, you're going to be in trouble. So I was like trying to put this saurine in my mouth, putting Lucozade Sport in there to try and like get it down. It was like disgusting, carnage. So having obviously been through that experience, maybe realise for next time, right, I need to bring some savoury options as well, just so that you've always got something to hand that, even if eating's the last thing on your mind, you're going to be able to reliably actually tolerate it and get it down you. Perhaps like a more rare mistake, but is people fueling too much. So try and make sure that you're not fueling too much relative to what your tolerance is. That's the whole purpose of training your gut over time to be able to absorb more. Think of it as being a bit like your progressive overload when you're strength training and linearly progressing. So if you know you can tolerate 60 grams an hour, right, try 70 grams next time. Just try and work out where your upper limit kind of lies. I think is a pretty smart move. Anything else to add to that one, mate?
Definitely. I think perhaps the only other little tidbit I've had is, particularly if it's an aid station type race, having little bits of food to look forward to. Maybe it's not necessarily the most optimal for your plan, or perhaps it's just something very different to your plan, but you know that every time you go into an aid station, amazing, I've got a chocolate squares bar rather than a gel, whatever it is. That was always I love a squares bar, but that was always my little one. And something that you can't carry with you, or that you don't want in your back pocket while you're running, for example. So little things like that just help break it up and give you something to break up the flavour fatigue, as you said.
Nice, man. That makes sense. Right, ready for the next one?
Yeah, so this is a really, really big one, particularly in solo races or the longer things go on for. And that's the psychological readiness. And it's understanding that all of these races, particularly when we add a trail element or up in the hills, they take a really long time, and you're going to be moving for a long time. And the longer an event goes on, the more opportunity there is for the little quitting demon to sit on your shoulder and whisper in your ear. The more opportunities there are, particularly if there's aid stations, for you to sit down and say, I can't go on. There's no more to give, and obviously the longer it goes on, the more opportunities there are for that to happen. So we want to be prepared for this, and there's a number of aspects here, and something that I advise all of my clients to do, and this is something I first did for myself in the military. I was advised to, when I went through airborne selection called P Company, I was advised by my officer commanding, a few of us went through, like a few of my peers, we were all on the same course, and he said, you guys are gonna keep each other going when you've had a bad day, and be prepared that every single one of you will have a bad day at some point. And I've always kept that in the back of my mind, in that if you know it's going to happen, you can be prepared, and you say, okay, you know what, I knew this was going to happen, and you can just have this little formula in your head: if X happens, do Y. If I have a bad day, this is what I'm going to remind myself of. I'm going to look back at my training log, and I'm going to say, look, I have done 60 kilometer weeks for a year. How can I not be prepared? It's whatever that little strategy might be, having that ability to say, you know what, I'm really struggling right now, but I'm not surprised. I expected this to be hard, and I'm not sort of taken by surprise by it. And having that element of pre-preparedness is super, super important, not just for ultra readiness, but anything that's a particularly hard endeavour. And that's something I advise all of my athletes to do, particularly in the ultra side. A few other elements that we can do, so getting used to the monotony of running for a long time, particularly in sort of like the smaller races where perhaps there's not as many people to run with, or perhaps you're going long periods solo. And a big part of this is just training on your own, training without music, perhaps following the same routes for loops for a training run, for example. Just getting used to being in your own head with no distractions, particularly if it's a race where you can't use headphones or it's not safe to do so. Just get used to having only yourself for company for a little bit, because it can be quite confronting if you've never done this before. And quite frankly, boredom is one of the reasons why some people quit. It's, I just can't take this anymore. Like they start to sort of, I guess, make all of these issues in their head seem bigger than they are. And when you've got nothing else to occupy your mind, it's very, very easy to do so. So just understanding that ultimately we're doing hard things for a reason. The whole point is that they're hard. And quite frankly, most of us wouldn't be satisfied if we got to the end and it was easy. What was the point in doing it? So I try and remind everybody of that. You know, you have elected and volunteered to do this hard thing out of your own choice. You are paid to do this. So you may as well do your best to try and enjoy it, to get used to the monotony, and understand that ultimately you're going to be better off for it. So a lot that we can do there. And to be honest, there's so many mental strategies. We could probably make a whole podcast episode out of that alone, and perhaps one to revisit. But yeah, there's a number of things we can do there. I think to sum that up from my perspective anyway, be prepared for the bad day or the bad hour. You know it's going to come. So have a little mantra in your head, have a little action so that you're not surprised. If X happens, do Y, and then just train for it. Be prepared to be bored.
Nice. No, mate, I really like it. I also like the point for you alluded to, like, you know, you're here by choice, and doing a lot of this stuff. Like, it is a genuine privilege, isn't it? Like, it is really cool to be able to say, like, yeah, I'm in this position through my own decision making, and like, it's been a privilege to train like this and like not have to. So yeah, if you kind of embrace that as a positive, that can make things a lot easier to get through, right? What I know obviously you mentioned how we could probably make another podcast about all these different mental strategies, but just for the purposes of the listeners now, have you got any other ones in particular you've drawn upon in the past to help you through those tough times?
Yeah, so one of them is called Quit Tomorrow. So you can quit at any time, but it has to be tomorrow. Or it has to be the next stage. So you know what? If you let yourself off the hook, you say, right, if you really can't do this, for example, in the case of a 100-miler, where you're probably going all day, you'd be hard pressed to get it done in 24 hours. So, you know, okay, you can quit at the next aid station. If you really, really want to, quit at the next aid station. And by the time you get there, you know what? That was okay. I made it. Okay, cool. Quit at the next aid station. Like, you can always make it to the next little bit, chunk it down, and it sort of lets you off the hook. It kind of takes some of that psychological pressure off. And I think there's a huge amount to be said for that. To, you know, as much as everybody loves the Goggins mindset or anything like that, there's a huge amount to be said for just taking that pressure off and being kind to yourself. Like we said, we've chosen to do these things, and you know, complaining or swearing at yourself or trying to have this macho attitude probably isn't going to help you. You need to just understand that this is a hard thing. You've chosen to do it. You may as well enjoy it, and complaining isn't going to make it any easier. So I can't remember who it is, but they've got a motto of suffer beautifully, in this idea of you've chosen to do it, so conduct yourself well, and essentially don't complain. Do it with a smile on your face. And it's one of those that going into it with that positive attitude really, really helps when you do inevitably have that slump, because at least you haven't spent all day miserable. It's going to happen. So you may as well spend what part of the day that you can trying to enjoy it as much as you can.
No, mate, I really like it. I like the whole idea and notion of giving yourself some self-compassion for all of this as well. Like, I think often, you know, like you say about the Goggins mindset, it can be easy to kind of like just macho the shit out of these things and like say, like, come on, you pussy, get on with it. But like, okay, great, well done. Right, where does that actually leave me? Instead, like, trying to think of yourself as like, right, am I talking to myself as I would like a friend? If you were talking to a friend going through like a tough time, no matter what it is, you'd probably be encouraging, compassionate, treat yourself the same. There's no reason why you would, like, you know, come on, you useless prick, get on with it. Like, fine, okay, you might think that works, but it really doesn't. I like that a lot. Sweet. Cool. I think I know that's our 5 pillars, but we've got a bonus. So the last one is to have good kit. So if you run a 5K in uncomfortable shorts, you're probably going to get through it okay. Try doing that in a 50 or further. There's no chance. It's just not going to happen. Those issues, the rubbing or whatever it might be, is going to amplify the longer the distance gets. So make sure that you're comfortable with the kit. Have some contingency plans in place as well. So it could be like, a fresh pair of shorts or socks in your bag. It could be making sure you've got some chamois cream or some anti-chafe balm or whatever, just to make sure that if little hot spots do appear, you can deal with it and address it. So I'm interested to hear about you, Kieran. So obviously, I'm guessing when you're doing some of this stuff in the military, you don't really necessarily get a choice of what kit you're always going to wear. So what sort of plans did you have in place to make sure that you could kind of make yourself a bit more comfortable with being uncomfortable, sort of thing?
So a huge amount of it is practicing in the kit you're going to do things in. So trade as you fight, as we used to say. In the, if you're going to have to walk around in big heavy boots and you're training in really lightweight, really comfortable, lovely high end boots, well, you're going to have a bit of a shock to the system when you have to put your big heavy duty ones on, for example. So you need to train in the way that you're going to conduct yourself and control the elements that you can control. So in the military, okay, I've only got a certain choice of Bergen to carry my kit in. Not much I can do about that, but I can control how padded I make the straps. I can control how I pack that load to make it more comfortable on my body and more stable. I can control what underwear I wear so I don't get chafe underneath my trousers, or what socks I use, what I practice. And in particular in the military, your feet are everything. You cannot conduct yourself as a soldier if you have terrible blisters or if your feet are falling apart. So it's really, really important that we look after our feet, and it couldn't be more true in the ultra side of things. Ultimately, a huge number of people DNF these events because of blisters, and it's wholly preventable. So the only, and I suffered really badly with blisters when I first joined the army. The only thing that worked for me was something like chamois cream or Vaseline. And the thing that worked above all else was toe socks. As much as people love to hate on them, and they make you look like well, I'm not even going to say what they make you look like. They're not exactly a fashion statement. Yeah. They're let's just say toe socks aren't exactly a fashion statement, but they
The
work.
ultimate contraceptive.
They really do. They sure are, particularly for long duration loaded marches, or really, and this does apply to things like trail ultramarathons where you're carrying a lot of kit. A lot of races have a mandatory kit list, and with the weight you're carrying, particularly with your water, it's not too dissimilar to a fighting load for, in some more extreme races, for example. So it's really applicable here. But what really worked for me was a thin pair of toe socks, and then if it was going to be long and heavy, I would put a pair of thicker hiking socks over the top of that. And I honestly couldn't tell you the last time I had a blister from one of these events. It just works. What I don't find is that works particularly well are like these thin anti-blister socks or anything like that. There's just not enough cushion for 50 or 100 miles. It's not going to happen. So that sort of double layer and practicing exactly how you're going to do things is game changing. It's so important, and if you haven't practiced it, you can't expect it to come off on game day. So play around with different things. We're all different. That's what worked for me. That worked my whole military career, and it essentially, once I found that out, it essentially stopped me ever having a blister again. And I've done some pretty long events, like 24 hours on my feet, like a 36-hour march kind of thing. So I've done a few crazy amount of time on feet type events, and yeah, blisters were the least of my worries once I learned about those kind of things.
That's cool. So it really was kind of a case of management then, right? And like, I'm sure you can attest,
Absolutely.
like, if you do get a blister, as kind of like benign as it may seem, it can really like stop you, can't it?
100%. Something we always talk about is treat them really early. So in the long races, if you feel a hot spot coming on, just take the time penalty, sort it now. Because if you let a little bit of rubbing develop into a blister, I don't care how tough you are, trying to push through a blister that has broken the skin and is bleeding, and you see some people, hobbling around with blood coming out of their trainers, the blisters are that bad. And that is one recipe for really long-term injury or being out of training. But the chances of you finishing a race like that, particularly a harder one, are minimal. So just take the time penalty early. If you feel something rubbing, address it there and then. And that goes for chafe from things like your running straps, I find. So particularly when it's cold or when it's wet, all of a sudden you might find you chafe in different places compared to when you've just been training normally and running around your city or your town, for example. Everything's different up in the hills. If you find that perhaps the inside of your legs are chafing, just sort it there and then, because if you let these things snowball, you are in for a really, really long day.
Nice. Yeah, mate, I guess it's the same as like the pacing, isn't it? What you do early on will dictate what happens to you later. And as you say, it's well worth taking
100%.
the hit on the time penalty early on, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Cool.
it's a nice way of looking at it like that, actually, because it really does snowball.
For sure, man, for sure. So I think that's our 5 pillars, right? Plus one bonus. And
Plus bonus.
if you're listening to this, yeah, exactly. And if you guys are listening to this and you think, you know what, I quite fancy an ultra, or you may be completely unsure about what the best training setup is for you now, we've built a really simple quiz to help you with that question, that dilemma. You basically answer a handful of questions about your training backgrounds, your current state of play as far as training is concerned, your goals, your time, and it will point you towards the best Omnia template for position that you're currently in. So you can also get a sample of that training after you filled in the quiz as well. So the link for that is in the show notes, and it's definitely worth 5 minutes or less of your time. So, Kieran, I think that's it from us. Thanks very much for listening, everyone, and we hope to see you on the next one.